It was almost midnight, and the office was dark, except for the lamp on her desk, when Vivian Hale leaned close enough that I could smell the cold coffee and the long day on her, and whispered, "You're the only one I trust." I had worked for her for 7 years. She had never once said a sentence like that. And she didn't say it the way you assign a task. She said it the way a person confesses something. Then she said the rest, lower, almost to herself, like it had slipped past a gate she usually kept locked. I stood there in the dark, holding a stack of papers whose purpose I'd completely forgotten, and I understood that the woman I'd spent 7 years calling boss had just shown me a door I'd been pretending wasn't in the wall. I'll get to what she said. First, you have to understand how careful 2 people can be for 7 years, and how that carefulness is sometimes just love that's been given a job title. My name is Eli Carver. I'm 36, and my job is operations manager, which is a polite way of saying I am the person things break in front of. I don't make the company's product, and I don't close its deals. I keep the machine running, the vendor who didn't deliver, the system that went down at 2 a.m., the small wrong thing nobody else has noticed is about to become the large wrong thing. I'm good at it, because I find the failure point first. 7 years of fixing other people's emergencies had made me very calm and very alone, in roughly equal measure. Vivian Hale ran the company. Her father had built it from a single warehouse. When he got sick, she'd stepped in to hold it, and when he died, she'd kept holding it. And she had never once let the grip show. She was 41, and exact in a way that made grown men straighten their ties in the elevator. People feared her. I had watched her take a lying supplier apart in 4 sentences without raising her voice. What people did not see, because she did not permit it, was that she ate dinner at her desk most nights, that hers was the last car in the lot, that she carried the entire weight of her father's life's work on a frame that looked like it might secretly prefer to set it down. She signed everything with his pen, a heavy black fountain pen, the gold nib worn soft, the kind of object that stops being a tool and becomes a tether. When a meeting went bad, she never fidgeted like the rest of us. She turned that pen instead, end over end, once, twice, and you learned to read the count. 2 turns meant trouble. I'd been reading her tells for 7 years and calling it being good at my job. Because that's the lie I'd like to mark early. I told myself the closeness was operational. I was her right hand. She trusted me with the machine. That was the whole of it. I was the loyal lieutenant, the one who stayed late, and if the best hours of my week were the quiet ones after everyone else had gone, when it was just the 2 of us and the hum of the building, well, that was just the job. I am very good at anticipating problems and historically terrible at noticing the one I'm standing inside. It was the sale that finally did it. 3 months earlier, her father's old partner, a man named Royce who'd held a minority stake and a grudge since before I was hired, had triggered a clause that put the company in play. And a firm with a reputation for buying places like ours and selling them off for parts had made the board an offer they found difficult to refuse. Vivian had been fighting it the way she fought everything, alone, in silence, with a calm that cost her something I couldn't see the price of. That night we'd stayed past 11, going through the numbers one more time, hunting for the single lever that would let her keep the thing her father had bled for. The office at night had its own weather, the SVAC gone quiet, the city a field of lights past the glass, the smell of a coffee pot burnt down to tar that neither of us had touched. Her lamp made a small warm island in all that dark. She'd taken her shoes off hours ago. She was turning the pen. 3 times. 4. A count I had never seen before. And I'd stopped pretending to read the spreadsheet, because there was nothing left in it to find. These were the hours I'd never have admitted I lived for. In daylight she was all edges, and the building arranged itself around her caution. But late, with the floor empty, something in her shoulders came down half an inch. And she'd think out loud, and once, months earlier, on a night like this one, she'd told me a story about her father teaching her to read a balance sheet at the kitchen table when she was 9, and I'd understood that I was being shown a room almost no one was let into. I'd carried that small fact around for months like a stone worn from someone's pocket. I'd told myself I just had a good memory for details. I have a good memory for her. There is a difference, and I had spent 7 years refusing to learn it. Then she said it, not looking up. "You're the only one I trust." A beat. The pen went still in her hand, and then the rest came out, the part I wasn't ready for. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, you became the only part of my day I don't have to brace for. And I think if I lose this place, the thing I'm actually afraid of losing is the reason to see you every morning. She heard it after she said it. I watched it land on her own face, the small horror of a person who has just realized her own mouth has filed something she meant to keep classified. She straightened, capped the pen, and put the wall back up so fast I felt the wind of it. "Forget that," she said, in her boardroom voice. "It's late. Go home, Eli." I went home. I did not forget that. I lay awake doing the one thing I'm genuinely good at, taking a broken thing apart to see how it actually worked. Except the broken thing was 7 years of my own life, and I did not like how much sudden, terrible sense it all made. The next morning she was at her desk before me, already armored, and she greeted me with a logistics question about a freight contract as though the night before had been a rounding error. I followed her lead. That was the arrangement. I fixed things, and the first thing I fixed every single morning was the fiction that nothing had changed. I told myself she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. She was 3 months into fighting for her father's company on no sleep and no allies, and people say things at midnight that belong to the exhaustion and not to them. The reason to see you every morning was a thing a tired woman says about a colleague she leans on. I built that explanation carefully, the way I build everything, and it held for about a day, which is longer than it had any right to. The trouble with being the man who finds the small wrong thing before it becomes the large wrong thing is that I'd already found it, and you cannot unnotice a load-bearing crack once you've seen it. I'd spent 7 years calling the best part of my day the job. The job does not keep you awake replaying one sentence at 3 in the morning, and once I started looking back, the structure of it was obvious. The way a building's frame is obvious once the drywall comes down. 2 restructurings in 7 years had quietly gone past my desk. Rounds where good people were walked out by lunchtime, and both times my name had simply never appeared on a list. And I'd assumed I was useful, and maybe I was. But useful people got cut all the time, and I never had. The year my mother was in the hospital, she'd reassigned my entire workload without my asking, and told the floor I was handling a vendor issue out of state, giving me 3 weeks no one questioned, and a lie I never had to tell. I'd filed all of it, under being valued. It is a strange thing, to spend 7 years being protected by someone, and call it being employed. The evidence, once I let myself count it, had been there for years under a label that kept me safe. She asked for me by name on everything that mattered, and I'd called that trust. She kept me later than the work required, and I'd called that the crisis. Twice that month I came in early and found 2 coffees waiting on my desk, the second one already going cold, as if she'd brought it over and then thought better of being caught bringing it. Royce saw it before I did, the way cruel people often see the truth first, because they're hunting for the soft place. In a hallway after a brutal board session, he looked from her to me and said, With a smile like a paper cut, she keeps you around like a nightlight carver. What happens to the help when the house gets sold? Vivian's hand tightened around the pen, once, hard, and she said something cold and surgical that ended the conversation, but I saw the count, and I understood that Royce had aimed at the exact place I'd been pretending wasn't tender. My entire profession is anticipating failure points. I had a wall-sized diagram of every way the company could break, color-coded, 3 contingencies deep. I did not have a single contingency for the possibility that the thing about to break was me. The worst one, the one I couldn't fix or file, came on a Sunday. I'd gone in to handle a server fault, thinking the building empty, and found her in her father's old office, the one she kept exactly as he'd left it, and never used. She was sitting in his chair in the gray Sunday light, the pen open in her hand, writing nothing, just holding it. And her face was doing the thing she never let it do at the office, coming apart, quietly, with no audience she had approved. She saw me. For 1 second she let me see it, the whole weight of it, the grief and the fear, and the bone-tiredness of holding a dead man's life up alone. Then she wiped it away with the heel of her hand and said, "The server," like a question. And I said, "It can wait." And for once I didn't fix anything. I just sat down across from her in that room full of her father, and we didn't talk, and it was the most useful thing I had done for her in 7 years. The deal came to its end on a Thursday night. She'd found her lever at last, not the one that saved the company whole, but the one that let her sell it on her own terms, to a buyer who'd keep the people instead of the parts, and walk Royce out the door with nothing he wanted. It cost her the thing itself. She signed it at her desk at 9 at night with her father's pen, and I stood by the window and watched her do it, and neither of us said a word. When the last page was signed, she set the pen down and looked at it for a long moment. The building was hers for a few more weeks, and then it wouldn't be. She wasn't really my boss anymore. The title was already a formality with an expiration date. The thing that had stood between us for 7 years, the hierarchy I'd hidden behind as much as obeyed, had just dissolved itself with the click of a pen cap. The city glittered past the glass. The lamp made its small warm island. She kept looking at the pen like it might tell her what came next. I didn't say anything. I'd learned, that Sunday in her father's office, that there were moments where fixing was the wrong instinct, where the only useful thing a person could do was stay in the room and let the silence hold the weight for a minute. So I stayed. I watched her run her thumb over the worn gold nib, the way she did when she was somewhere far away, somewhere with him, in it, and I let the quiet be the quiet. Outside, a plane crossed the dark. Somewhere down the hall a door clicked. 23 floors below, the city went on not knowing that a man's life's work had just changed hands, and that 2 people who'd circled each other for the better part of a decade were finally, slowly, running out of reasons not to say the thing. "I keep thinking," she said finally, to the pen and not to me, "that I just gave away the only reason I had to be in this building." A breath, and the strange part is, it's not the building I can't picture walking out of. She turned to face me, and the armor was gone. Not slipped, not cracked, but set down, deliberately, the way she set down the pen. "I've spent 3 years being the only thing holding this up," she said. "And the only minutes I wasn't afraid were the ones with you. I told myself that was because you're competent. It isn't because you're competent, Eli. There are competent people everywhere. It's you." She said it steadily, but I was watching her hands, and her hands weren't steady at all. Something in my chest went still, then dropped, the quiet kind of still, The kind a machine goes when you finally cut power to a motor that's been straining so long you forgot it was loud. 7 years of telling myself I stayed late for the work, and there was the work, sold and signed. And I was still standing in her office at 9 at night with no reason to be there, except the only real reason there had ever been. I made myself slow down, because the single most important thing in that room was that she be free to take it all back. Vivian. I chose the words like I was diffusing something. You don't owe me this. You just signed away the thing you've carried for 3 years, and you're exhausted, and I will never be the man who hears a vulnerable thing and treats it like a contract. If tomorrow you want this to have been the long day talking, then it was the long day talking, and I'll still be the first one in the building. Same as always. I'm not going anywhere either way. So if you need the door, it's open, and you never have to explain it. I gave her the door. With her it mattered more than it ever had, that the person who'd held all the power feel, for once, that she could choose something without it costing her anything. She didn't take it. She closed the small distance between her desk and where I stood, and she reached out and took my hand, fingers ink stained at the side, cool, certain, and she said, I've been making decisions for everyone else for 3 years. Let me make this one for me. I don't want the door. So I told her the true thing, and I didn't say I love you, because she'd been handed 1,000 sentences by people who wanted something from her, and I refused to give her another one she'd have to vet. You're the only person who never once made me feel like the help, I said. Everyone in that building needed me to fix something for them. You're the only one who ever just let me be in the room. 7 years, and the safest I have ever felt was being the last car in the lot, next to yours. I didn't stay for the job, Vivian. I stayed because the building had you in it. And I told myself a story about loyalty because the truth was too big to file. I lifted my free hand to the side of her face, slowly, leaving every inch of room for her to step back. And she didn't. You said, I'm the only one you trust. So trust me with the rest too. She made a sound that was half a laugh and half something that had been waiting 3 years to get out. And she stepped in. And we kissed in the lamplight of an office that was no longer hers, careful and unhurried. 2 people who had been standing 6 feet apart for 7 years, finally closing it. And then the cleaning crew's cart rattled in the hall and a vacuum roared to life right outside the door. And we broke apart laughing like teenagers caught somewhere they shouldn't be. She pressed her forehead to my collarbone and said, into my shirt, we have to leave. They need to do the floors. It was the least romantic possible sentence, and it was perfect. Because it was hers, and she was already finally talking to me like a person instead of a podium. 3 months later, she started something new, small, hers, no board and no Royce, and no inherited weight. The first hire she made was me, except she refused to call it a hire. She put my name on the door beside hers, which is a thing a boss does not do, and a thing she did entirely on purpose. We were careful with it. We had built our whole rapport on a hierarchy, and we had to learn each other again without 2 people figuring out how to stand as equals when one of them had spent 7 years bringing the other coffee. She still ran cold and exact in meetings. She still turned her father's pen, which she kept, when something went wrong. But now, afterward, she'd find me, and the turning would stop. A year after that, I came in early the way I always had and found 2 coffees on the desk, the second one no longer going cold, because she'd stopped pretending she hadn't brought it. That was the whole revolution, in the end, not the kiss. The second coffee, finally, admitted to. Years later, when people ask how we got together, she says she trusted me before she liked me, which is true and very her. I say it took a man watching a company get sold out from under us before either of us would admit there'd ever been an us. But the version I keep is the Sunday in her father's office. The pen open and writing nothing. The 1 second she let me see the entire weight before she armored back up. That was the moment I stopped being the person who fixed her problems and started being the person she would let have them. It wasn't sudden, it had probably always been her. The last car in the lot. 7 years of late nights I had carefully mislabeled as duty. It just, one midnight, said the rest out loud. So tell me, what would you have done if the person you'd worked under for years leaned in and whispered that you were the only one they trusted, and then said the rest? Would you have filed it under the job, the way I tried to, or would you have finally said the true thing back? And have you ever stayed somewhere far too long, calling it loyalty, when the truth was just a person you couldn't bring yourself to leave? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one. If this one found you somewhere late and quiet, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.